Hi, it's me. This is part two of Women as a Minority Group. So I wanted to skip ahead to some of the next links or some of the next sections of the book, talking about lower class women, particularly entering the workforce and or already in the workforce, depending on your class or race, right? As they enter the workforce, one thing that is important to understand is many women still had to do what was called the second shift, right? And this still kind of in many ways still exists today, wherein you come home from work, but now you have to still do all the domestic work, which is expected of you because you are a woman, right? So you do the domestic labors, you take care of the children, you cook, you clean, everything, and so there's no sharing of this domestic labor with the husbands. That's there's some shifts in this lately, which is good, but there's still that expectation oftentimes of women having to shoulder the burden of this domestic these domestic duties, right? To the extent that poor and working class women have to work to make ends meet in this economy, this has very really little to do with women's liberation as per the 1960s and 70s and stuff. It has everything to do with economic necessity if you think about it now, right? The next section talks about minority women. And sometimes with regard to immigration rights, sometimes there's how like there may be specific gender norms from the country of origin that may become in conflict with uh, somewhat more liberal gender norms in the United States, right? So sometimes there's conflicts between traditional family roles, what's expected in the in the home culture with regard to the host culture. Sometimes this is equalized through the more time you're here and the more Americanized you become, the higher educational attainment you have. So this may change, right? Um, for Black women, the book mentions there's kind of a dichotomy. So those who are college educated really do well in employment, income, egalitarian marriages, although still paid less than white women and, of course, men in general. Um, However, lower income or poorer Black women, there's less of the above. There's less equal, how do we say equalization with regard to employment, income, etc. And this is very important. Many minority women do not often identify with the feminist movement because it is seen as a white women's movement. This has been changing, right? But like many of the issues that minority women are more focused on, more had to do with economic stability, a better future for their children, racial discrimination, some of these intersecting lenses, right? So it's important to understand that as both a minority group member and a woman, one is at a disadvantage and encounters more prejudice, discrimination, and marginalization on multiple levels. We talked about that intersectionality, right? So for many women, and this is really what the focus of feminism is today: third wave feminism. Um, there's shared concerns about for lower income minority women, such as high infant and maternal mortality rates in the Black community and other uh, uh, immigrant communities as well. Access to health care, segregation of housing and schools, educations, gang activity in safe communities, under and unemployment, attacks on welfare programs, attacks on reproductive rights, child care and family stability. These are all feminist issues. We might not think of them as feminist issues, but these are all feminist issues, all these things, and they should be a concern to all of us, right? So the next section of the book I wanted to highlight was the social indicators of women's status, such as education. It used to be in our country segregated by gender. Education was men and women were taught differently and in different ways. Nothing too academic or scientific for women because it was deemed to be too hard, right? Particularly in STEM fields. But as women have integrated more fully into the academic world, they're often encouraged and pushed into careers that were coded as female, particularly earlier on. Men were pushed to enter male-dominated fields, so there still exists a gender bias that is subtle, and these unconscious notions of what we should expect of boys and girls educationally, what kind of fields we should push them into. But we are seeing with within the last decade, we have been seeing a steady increase in women in once male-dominated disciplines, particularly STEM fields and businesses, business education. College enrollment has steadily increased for women of all categories, surpassing men actually, which is great. So um, uh, when we look at employment, it's important to understand that we have some jobs that are called pink collar jobs, jobs that are coded as feminine. If you look at the chart on page 404 in my version of the book, then there's also other jobs that are considered male-dominated professions. It's important to understand that many pink collar jobs tend to be lower paying, right? And even if you integrate more fully into male dominated jobs, there's something called a glass ceiling, which is a real but unseen discriminatory policy that limits female advancement and upward mobility into top management positions. So it's important to understand that, like, at the level of managers, CEO, things like that. Um, there is a dearth of women, right? It's partly due to gender role expectations. Men are seen as more capable, assertive, smarter, knowledgeable, and whatever they say because we're men, and women are more suited in auxiliary roles or helping roles, things like that, secretarial roles, things like that, right? This glass ceiling, of course, is compounded by race. However, there has been some marginal improvement in this, with more CEOs and top managers being women, but there's still a large gap. Another large gap that we have today is still the gender pay gap. According to the stats in the book, at the publication of this book, about 79 cents to a dollar of what a man makes is what a woman makes. This is again compounded by race. So there's other issues with regard to choosing motherhood over career, or working outside the home. And we have to interrogate those expectations that if a woman becomes a mother, she has to make a choice between working and staying at home, or doing both, and how choosing motherhood may delay career goals and eliminate chances of promotion. Oftentimes, this is compounded by the unaffordability or unavailability of quality child care, right? Women may have to make these choices that cause them to lose jobs or work part-time. This also increases what we call the feminization of poverty, which we discussed before. And this is particularly an issue for single women head of household families, that which there's no other partner available, right? Some companies have got better with this, instituting something called flex time, where you can have a little bit of flexibility in your schedule to meet childcare needs, or on-site daycare centers. But this is not universal, and it definitely depends on the luck of the job that you have. But all this stuff is generally not expected of men. It's expected of women because they're expected to be the primary child rearers. So men in general do not have to, still in our country, do not have to be expected to carry this. I don't want to say double burden, but it is a double burden, right? The expectations is that the women have to take care of that because they're considered to be the primary child rearers, right? So men generally do not have to contend with all that stuff, right? So the next section of the book talks about sexual harassment, and we see this in the workplace in particular, and also in general society. But it's very pernicious in the workplace because it contributes to the subordination and vulnerability of women in the workplace. Institutionally, in higher education as well, we see higher incidence of harassment and sexualized violence in male-dominated professions and in institutions. So we see it here. Particularly, we also see it in the military as well, other male-dominated professions. There is, with the advent of the Me Too movement, what we have been seeing lately, and this is not really in the book, we've seen an increase in reporting of cases, as well as of high-profile men being accused of sexual harassment and violence. Think about the Harvey Weinstein trial that just happened in New York recently, which was awesome. Get them. This is important stuff to talk about. That is still very pernicious, and things that contribute to this culture of sexualized violence and harassment is this culture that encourages male dominance and sexual assertiveness and female sexual responsiveness. and how just power is distributed unequally in the first place in the workplace, in which men tend to supervise the work of women, and that can like set up instances wherein men feel that they have the right to dominate over women in many other ways, right? So the book also talks about some legal sexism in the law. It's important to understand we still do not have an equal rights amendment. We may be getting closer to it. Virginia just ratified the Equal Rights Amendment that Congress passed in 1972. So we're there. We're at the point now where we have enough states that have ratified the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution. The Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution says that equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on the basis of sex. Very important. There's been a lot of time passage, so there's a debate on whether we need to redo it all over again or if we can make some changes to like now let it be adopted as an amendment to the Constitution. And then we have to also look at the people who were kind of against adopting the Equal Rights Amendment. And if you like look at the news, you can probably figure out who they are. So we'll leave that for another day. So the book then talks about the three sociological analysis views that we've talked about before: functionalist view, conflict view, interactionist view. I guess we would look at the functionalist view. If we look at the gender roles and gender norms, it's important to understand that like way back when there was much more smooth functioning society, particularly because gender norms weren't really questioned. There was the division of labor between instrumental tasks by men working outside the home and expressive tasks or women working inside the home. Not for all women, but like there was this kind of like that made the smooth functioning society, and it was believed that these differences between men and women were naturalized, that they were natural, biological, and fixed. So you had to adhere to this gender role expectations, and that's what promoted stability in society. So when feminism came along, particularly second wave feminism in the 50s and 60s, it was seen as so socially destabilizing, and it called into question these strict gender roles. So really what the solution is now is to redefine gender roles that would overcome dysfunction in society, right? The conflict view, however, takes a different approach, and it really looks at who benefits from the status quo. It looks at how male dominance, subordination of women, inequality, and gender discrimination and violence should be treated along the lines of other forms of exploitation and oppression, right? Strict and regressive gender roles keeping women in a subordinate status. So as women achieve greater economic independence in our country, they have developed a heightened consciousness of their shared bonds of exploitation, and feminist movement gained momentum and challenged the structural sexism and gender inequality embedded in institutions. And it's important to look at how sexism is embedded in social institutions where men are in controlling positions of power. So only through the social activism of feminism and allies can we challenge and disrupt this. And it's important to, again, understand who benefits from gender inequality. The answer is men and some higher class women who are associated with these men, right? And that's why we still have this gender pay gap as well. The interactionist view kind of looks at how socialization agents such as school, family, media, peer groups, and religion promote gender role identity and norms in various ways, including, by example, reinforcement and gender policing, right? And we internalize these social definitions of appropriate gender behavior based on how we're identified or how we're assigned as male and female, as well as our place in the social structure. So sometimes there are cultural shifts and redefinitions with regard to gender, but this is met oftentimes with backlash, right? Increasing sexualized violence, increasing discrimination against women. So the solution for this is to need to be aware of the biases in what we teach our children and expectations, eliminate stereotypes through media and education. So this is the end of this. Work on your discussion board posts, and that's it. I have the click now because it's at 15 minutes. Thanks. Bye.